with children, who are working below expectations. Our speaker today is Tony Staneff, who is the Power Maths series editor. So thanks very much, Tony, for joining us. I'm Simon Holden-White from Pearson. I'm going to hand over to Tony in just a moment. It is a 45-minute webinar which would include Q&A. And I think the only other quick thing for me to mention is just asking questions. So if you have a question that you want us to answer, then it's best to use the Q&A box within Zoom. And that helps us to kind of track the questions and answer them. If you use the chat, then that just makes a comment that everybody can see and isn't quite as easy to track. So, you know, unless you want to sort of comment for everybody to see and you want an answer, best to use the Q&A. Okay, good. Tony, let's hand over to you now.
Thank you, Simon. Lovely to see everybody today. So as Simon said, speak for about 20 to 30 minutes. My aim is to, and I'll pick up some questions. My aim is to try and cover the following. Just talk very briefly about whole class teaching. Then just talk about use of quick recaps and power-ups, supporting lower attainers, then just some guidance section by section, and then other forms of additional support and intervention that you may do. Now, I picked up a lot of these ideas from working with schools, talking to teachers, etc., who are using Power Maths. I know there are some challenges always when there are gaps in learning, gaps in understanding. So hopefully there'll be a couple of ideas that you can take away with you, as you said, and depending on how much you've been using Power Maths or whether you're going to start it in September, etc. So here we go. So firstly, I just want to check a couple of things, make sure we're all on the same page. So firstly, Power Maths was always designed to be for whole class teaching. It was always designed thinking about what the NCTM are promoting, thinking about the national curriculum objectives in terms of children keep staying broadly together. It was always designed as a whole class teaching program. And then the idea is that by keeping the class together, if you put Power Maths into place in year one, then year two, etc., the idea is by keeping it the class together, the idea is that these gaps should decrease over time. So if you put Power Maths in across your school to begin with, then that's fine. But then hopefully, as your year one starts to go through year two and into year three, that the gaps should start decreasing. And I know, speaking to some schools, they're definitely noticing that. There does remain, though, absolutely, we have to acknowledge that there are some children who still need support because they've either not grasped the concepts or they've got existing gaps in the knowledge. And those are probably in every single classroom up and down the country, or the vast majority. And it's one of the biggest questions we get asked is how do you cope with those children? How do you deal with those? How do you deal with that situation? And the one thing I want to say really from the outset is I think what's really important is is to avoid children working on different concepts. So just because you might have some children who, for example, are working say numbers to 100 and you're trying to get numbers to 1,000 or 10,000, etc. I think my advice would be to avoid teaching that these are just getting numbers to 100, these are getting 10,000. I think that's counterproductive. I think it's unambitious, etc., etc. But there are things that you can do, which we'll talk about in a second. But the idea that this was very much designed for a whole class teaching program. So I'm hoping that's the main reason that people are here today, to get these, to get this understanding of maybe ideas that they can take away. So the first thing I want to just talk to you about is firstly the quick recaps. Sorry, I'll come on to that. First thing, you know your classes better than anybody. Everybody on this webinar today knows their classes better than anybody else. You know where they are, what they can do, and you know then how your teaching needs to adapt to make sure your children progress as much as they can. And I think one of the biggest things that I get is, well, they haven't got this concept in this lesson. Should I move on to the next lesson? That's a decision depending on curriculum time left. That's a decision essentially on how important that concept is in maths for the year, for understanding. But I wouldn't encourage you just plowing on to the next lesson if actually they need a tiny bit more time on a particular topic or a particular concept if you deem it really important. So for example, if I'm looking at addition and subtraction in year 3, we'll start to really do the column method. I think I know a lot of schools just want a tiny bit more fluency practice and spend a bit more time on it. And I think that's absolutely fine to do. But you may have to think about where you can make up that time later on. I'll come on when I talk about curriculum design later. So, but I think what's really important as a teacher is firstly just take that opportunity to think about where your class are at the moment, think about the lesson that you're going to do, and think about maybe anything that you can do just before we begin on making sure that there's making sure we've got something that they can cover before, or make sure they've got the basics, the foundational knowledge before they move into the main part of the lesson. There's always been the power up, we've always had the power up for the new edition as well. We have these quick recaps. So these quick recaps have been designed to support maybe all children in the group, but particularly useful for those who've got prior existing gaps in knowledge, with low retainers who maybe just need that quick recap. So for example, if I'm doing a lesson on counting in 10, we might just practice of counting in 10 to 100 before we go beyond 100, or this idea of making sure before we partition a 3-digit number, can we make sure they can partition using a part whole or 2-digit number, because they're going to see part holes in this lesson, they're going to look at partitioning the number. So can they can they do that before? What's a step down before to make sure they can do that? So this idea of a 2, 3, 4-minute quick recap at the very start of the lesson, they give those ideas. If you're using the old version, the quick recaps are not there, but you can very much think about actually what do I need to do that will help my children access the main content of this lesson. So that's the first thing I would talk about, is making sure they've got that prior foundational knowledge, understanding before they tackle the lesson. That's the first thing. The other thing that I would say is the teacher guide is full of useful information, and throughout every lesson, there are 3 bits of guidance in there in terms of how you can help strengthen understanding, how you can help children who maybe haven't grasped the topic or haven't grasped a bit before, how you can help them really really understand the topic. So do just have a quick look at that teacher note just before the lesson as well, so that you've got some context to how you might be able to support them. The highlighted strength in understanding sections, you'll see, like I said, there's 3 or 4 in every single lesson, depending on the section. So spend a bit of time looking at those strengthening understanding. So let's move on to discover really. I think this is where schools have the fewest problems, okay, but we'll still talk about it. So firstly, key thing is make sure all children understand what they're being asked to do. And that might seem obvious, but I've been into some schools where not all children are fully understanding the task before they get on with it, and then the teachers ended up having to explain it to different groups. So all I would say, use that time at the very start to make sure that they're looking at the discover image and they're saying, right, do you know what you need to do? Some teachers, okay, for some lessons they'll do part A first and then they'll do part B, and that's absolutely fine as well. Use it flexibly is what I would say. So just make sure before you begin that every single child in that group knows what they're having to do. I would say have equipment ready for children to do the activity. Sometimes the children that struggle to manage different things, and so you might want to make sure, and therefore they don't spend enough time on thinking about the maths. Therefore, what you might want to do is just make sure you've got, say, the right number of counters ready, or the right number of 10 frames, or whatever it is that you're using. Just make sure you've got that ready for children to do the activity. So if they're working on the desk, they can get straight to it. That will massively support children who have maybe not got certain concepts, because if they don't know there are 10 counters on a 10 frame, for example, they might have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, whereas somebody who's maybe grasped that concept just builds it up without having to count. So it's just taking them a tiny bit longer. So maybe consider having, where possible, equipment ready for children to do the activity. And then I think what's really important as well is that that children, particularly those that are struggling, know what the equipment represents. So if you're using, for example, counters to represent the flowers in the vase, make sure you're explicit, particularly in the early stages of using power maths, that they understand that those counters or those cubes or whatever it is represent those is represent one of those classes, because it feels quite easy to us, but for children that concept is it can be quite tricky. So something to bear in mind. And finally, you know your class, as I said at the very start, you know your class better than anybody else. So make sure that you're aware of where those issues might be in terms of that they don't have the knowledge, or they might need support with this, might need help with that. Then just support those children. Use it if you've got classroom support as well, that you may need the most guidance, and deploy that support in the right way. But for Discover, I think the key thing is making sure that every child has got the opportunity to access this, the context, etc. In the new version, hopefully you will notice that the new version, for those that are using the new version, you'll notice that those questions do flow a bit better as well, in terms of they're a bit clearer on what we want children to do based on feedback from the first one. So that's Discover. So moving on to share.
Tony,
Oh yeah, sorry, apologies.
mind if I just jump in for a second, just to
Yeah,
say,
absolutely, please do.
it's just on your audio. I mean, I can hear you, and
Yeah.
and you know, and I can hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's a bit echoey. So I just wonder if there's any little tweak you
Give
can
me
make.
1 second. Is that still echoing? Give me 1 second. Does that help?
I'm not
Okay.
sure, to be honest. What have you changed?
Volume now.
It might have helped. We might realise if you keep going. Should I let you keep going? I just wonder if I think we can carry on if you kind of you know, if you don't have an obvious solution, but if there's something you could tweak, we could just try it before you get too far.
Any better?
What have you done?
Nothing more. Spoken a bit lower. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
I can switch to my laptop if need be, if you want me to. I can just very quickly take 2 seconds.
Do you think that might be better?
Okay, let me continue, and if it gets really bad, I'll then switch to laptop really quick. All right.
All right.
If there's lots, if people, I'll do this slide, and then if people want me to move over, then please just let people know in the chat or Q&A, and I will move it. Okay. So on the share section, what I would do is I go through take that opportunity to go through the different methods carefully to ensure that children understand. I think sometimes, again, as teachers, we assume that children can see it, can do it, and you might do these slightly differently as a class. You might, as a teacher, you might do these where the class talk about, and you don't necessarily show the share page. Okay, that's sometimes what happens. However, when you do go through the share, do take that opportunity to make sure children really do understand that there are 5 bars, and you see the 5 bars as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I promise it will help all children. It will absolutely help all children. Again, the same idea. Please do make that link between the concrete, pictorial, and abstract parts as explicit and as clear as you can, so that they understand. Okay, here are the 5 vases. Here's maybe the 5 cups on your desk. Those represent the vases, and the counters represent 2 counters that maybe you've used to represent flowers. They make sure they totally understand that. So you're going through these methods as clearly as possible. So that's what I would encourage to share. I think most schools are taught to seem to be okay with Discover and Share in terms of the lower attainers, because I think they support them well. But that's some good advice in terms of making sure that all the class can access it and have a go, really. Simon?
I think it'd be worth trying on your laptop if you don't mind, Tony. Sorry about that.
Yeah, okay. So if you could just fill for 2 minutes, is that all right? 2 seconds. Right? I will do literally 1 second.
Yeah, okay. Tony's sharing the PowerPoint, so I've got a couple of slides to do at the end, but I don't think I can pull them forward because here we go.
Is that better? Is that better?
I think so. I think so. Thanks so much for doing that. I think that's going to be really helpful.
Great. Just give me 2 seconds to share, everybody. Apologies. Sorry. just make sure. Can you see that, Simon?
Yep.
Great. So just moving into Think Together next. So as we move into Think Together then. So this is where I think I want to try and give people the confidence if they want to diverge, add, take away from, etc. Because I think this is where most teachers that I've worked with and schools that I see struggle with most in terms of how to adapt this really for their class. So what we've tried to do is provide 3 questions. Usually the third question is always a challenge. I'll come on to the challenge later on, but usually, but there's normally 2 questions before the challenge, which are designed really to build on what they've just done in the Discover, right? What I would encourage is for hopefully that first question, work together as a class. You might do more of the modeling of it, make sure you and discuss those key learning points. And then, and use representations to support as necessary. But the key thing I would say is that if you've got, if you know your group after those 1 or 2 questions still need some further practice, right, then this is the time that I would make sure I'd build it in, right? So don't necessarily just move on to the challenge. Take the opportunity in this Think Together to maybe add extra to make sure it more matches your group, or take some things away. So for example, it's possible that the group that you're working with, the bars are actually a bit more confusing for the children, and it's confusing those children that are struggling. What you might do is just talk about the method. And so you just think, actually, I'm not necessarily going to fully cover the bar today, but I'm going to do something a bit different. Or you might want to add another. So looking at question 1A here, you might want to just add more questions like 3/7, take 4/8, take 5/8, just to make sure that the whole class has got it. So what I'm trying to get at here is that this is where I think you can flex it a bit to suit the needs of your class. So you might sometimes, I've seen some teachers say, you know what, I'm going to add a question before this where we just do 7/8 minus 2/8, or we just do I don't know, 7/8 minus 3/4 or something along those lines. So they just take it, they're adapting it because they know what their class need. And I would absolutely encourage that. We've designed these to be helpful. In the new version of Power Maths, we've put more fluency-based questions in here. The representations are there to support, but we appreciate that sometimes a representation for some children might be more confusing. So do use it how you feel will be helpful for your group, really. And then I'm also conscious, and I've got a slide on it later, that we need to be ambitious. Okay, so we need to, when teaching maths, you need to be ambitious as a teacher. You want to make sure that all children succeed. You want to make sure that all children can grasp most topics. So therefore, there's also a bit of thought, knowing your class, what may be extending prompts you could use with some children if you know they're going to get it really quickly. So can I just give them another question, for example? Or could I say, here's the answer, what was the question? It's just thinking of those prompts that can, if you know that you've got some attainers that you want to close a gap with, right? What can I do with these others just to keep them, make sure they're thinking about something a bit deeper that necessarily these lower attainers will eventually get to, okay? These ones that you want to support, but they're just not there yet. So that's what I would say. So Think Together is where I believe you can be really flexible. Question 3 is almost always the challenge. So just a reminder that it's usually there a challenge. It may or may not be appropriate for the lowest attainers in the group. Okay, that's just where they are at the moment. It doesn't mean they'll never ever be able to do it. It just means at this moment in time, there's just too, and I just want them to, too much on there. I just want them to focus on this. That's absolutely fine if that's what you feel is right, but just keeping in the back of your mind not to hold them back if they can do it. So question 3 is always a challenge. And it's a decision that needs to be made, I think, on a lesson by lesson basis. So I know some teachers will just provide initially a bit more additional practice, and then sometimes they'll pick up the challenge at the end of the day or as part of something else, etc., etc. I'm not saying never do the challenge. I'm saying it's something that you can flex and be flexible with. So that's Think Together. So then if we move into practice, so again, we've listened, we've heard, we've adapted. So we know a lot of the comments that we got about the first Venture Power Maths is that you wanted a bit more fluency practice. So we've added more fluency practice to this, and you should notice if you to the practice book. So you should notice if you're using the new edition that they are full of more fluency type questions. Okay, less words, etc., etc. So we've tried to reduce that cognitive load where we can in lots of places. So those early questions are designed to be a bit more fluency based to help. But what the balance is always not putting too much in, because you also want that reason, you also want that problem, you also want to make sure you're stretching and challenging as well. So therefore, it's just that balance between making sure it's not just fluency, that everybody's got an opportunity to think and reason, etc., etc. But at the same time, I'm conscious that some children need to get that confidence with mathematics. Make most appropriate use of any additional classroom support. So just utilize that as best you can. And I know some schools make use of the White Rose worksheets to supplement early questions and give more fluency, because it is tied in with a White Rose scheme. So some do that, and then they stick parts in or they staple them in. And then Simon's going to talk to you later a bit about math selects as well, which is something else that could be used as well to maybe just give that boost in confidence, stroke extra practice that some children in your group might need as well. So just in general, what I think I made this point a tiny bit earlier is I would say, please do avoid moving on too quick. If there are children that need more practice, right, if it's a whole class or something, then consider spending a bit more time on it, right? You may have to move things about potentially in the curriculum, or you know what, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do this topic then. I might move mass and capacity to science or some. I know curriculum is always tight, whatever subject, but it might be a decision you made. The NCTM have put out curriculum prioritization documents. You might want to look at those to say, you know what, NCTM are saying that these are the priority topics in a curriculum. We're going to spend a bit more time on those. So what I would say is avoid moving on too quick. Take that opportunity to do a few an extra lesson on something, or maybe go through one of the challenges a different day, etc., whatever that might be. In Key Stage 1, you might consider using a program that will help develop number confidence, because I think being confident with number is really important. NCTM have clearly got their Mastering Number program, okay, and there are other things available elsewhere. But you might want to consider using a program that helps just develop that number confidence, that number fluency. And I know increasing number of schools are taking 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes out of the day to develop that number confidence, those basic skills, because that will free up that working memory, which will help children really grasp those more complicated topics. So it is something, if there is time in the timetable, to be able to something to consider, really. And I think schools who are doing this and have got a program in place are noticing, I believe, are noticing a difference. So something to consider with that. And then clearly, are there opportunities for those children with those gaps to catch up outside of lessons? I know some use tutoring. I know some use extra work with support assistants or mentors and other things like this. So are there opportunities for them to catch up outside of the lessons, is what I would say. And then some schools do use extracts from earlier year group books. Okay, so just I'm not recommending this in any way, and they don't use, what they don't do is I haven't seen a school who will give, say, the year 3 pages to a year 5 group in the lesson, but I have seen some schools where outside of the lesson, working with a TA at a different time, they might revisit some of that year 3 and 4 content just to give them that boost before before they maybe move on to another concept. So again, that's something else that you might want to consider. And because I'm also conscious that a lower attainer, or somebody who's not grasped something in a particular area of maths, doesn't mean they can't do this area of maths. So there might be absolute experts at shape, but you know what, I've just got this lack of knowledge with percentages or something, or decimals, etc. So it's just making sure that we're not pigeonholing children in general, really. And that leads me on to that growth mindset. So I think there's the whole piece around ensuring teachers use that language that promotes a growth mindset. Okay, if you haven't got that quite yet, but you get in there, etc., etc. It's that challenge. And then wherever you look for evidence about growth mindset, about success in terms of anything and subjects, is that it shows that success builds confidence, and that confidence leads to further success. I think we all know this as teachers, that when you teach a group and they get something and they get it, and it gives them that boost, it gives them that dopamine effect that says, oh yeah, I've got this, and it leads on to further success. And I think what you're trying to create by adapting the lesson for the learner's needs in your group, you're trying to build that confidence that will help lead to further success. So that for me is something that's really key. And I mean, we're doing, and this is right at the very other end of the spectrum at the moment, but we're doing at White Rose, we're doing some work with post-16 learners who haven't got their maths GCSE. But it goes back to the same principles, that they've got these big gaps in knowledge, and how you build that confidence, how you get there, is very much about small wins, building confidence, because that will lead to further success. And then the other thing that some schools do is they do some pre-teaching. So what they'll do, I've seen some teachers do it the night before, I've seen some teachers do it prior to the lesson. If the lesson's later on in the morning, they'll just do a bit of pre-teaching where they'll remind them of the concepts. It's slightly different to the quick recap. It's more explicit teaching, where you're saying to them, right, here's more direct, here's the place value grid. We're going to make the number 232, 200s, 3 10s, and 2 1s. Okay, so you might want to consider 5 or 10 minutes of pre-teaching. Again, there are things that you can read around that, really. And then the message I don't want to come from this webinar today is that really, that we should be teaching to the where the gaps exist, etc. I'm not saying that. Those children need masses of support to get them to where they need to be, to catch up, to keep up, etc., etc. But I think there are things that you can do with those learners in a group who maybe just grasp something a bit quicker. Okay, so it's whether if you go when we did the China exchange, okay, you noticed that they were using a lot of the class to be little teachers. So if they got something a bit earlier than somebody else, they just help somebody else out and say, oh, help your friend out, help this out. And because they knew that would strengthen the understanding of that child who's helping out. So consider the idea of little teachers. There are extending prompts and questions in all of the teacher book notes. So in other words, if you want some ideas on how if somebody's got something quickly, if you want, how can I take it a bit further without moving on to a different topic, in other words, deeper understanding, those are always there. And then there are also, that's per lesson, and then there are also some tasks which are a bit more open-ended, say at the end in the unit checks, but also in the there is some extension and other activities, I think, as well that come alongside it. So there are things there, so you don't feel like you're holding up others in the group, because actually I need to spend a bit more time making sure we've all grasped this topic. It can absolutely work in tandem, and I think it's just about the idea of adapting that teaching to make it to make the lesson run as smoothly as possible. I think, Simon, that's my thoughts done in terms of and having spoke to schools. I know there'll probably be some questions, but I know, Simon, you wanted to talk about a couple of things before that, and then we can pick up some questions. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, it sounds perfect in terms of timing. Thank you very much. So yeah, you can put in any questions that you've got for Tony, and he'll have a chance to kind of reflect on any questions that you've asked for a second. And yeah, and I'll just talk for a moment about a couple of other things that you might find useful. So a couple of files on ActiveLearn that hopefully will be helpful. If you imagine going into ActiveLearn and you're on the Power Maths homepage, and then you click on the planning tile, the one for the new edition, then you land on the planning guidance page. So, by the way, that's a page from ActiveLearn on the left, and then that's something else on the right. So you land on that planning guidance page, and I've highlighted a new file that's been added for the new edition anyway, because we had it for the original edition before, which is the prerequisite lesson matching chart. So as Tony's been talking about, sometimes it's going to be helpful to be able to find content from a prior year that matches the topic that you're teaching. So this chart can help you find that. And actually, a couple of files below that is something that I hadn't highlighted, but Tony just mentioned it, which is the ready to progress criteria. So we have matched the new edition content to the ready to progress criteria in both directions. So hopefully that will help you when you've got, for instance, difficult decisions to make about where you really focus your time if that becomes something that you really have to think about. So so there are those ready to progress charts that aren't highlighted, and then down towards the bottom, can you see there's a section called how to use Power Maths? And there we've got a few PDFs which are pages from the new teacher guides, and I've put one of those up on the right hand side of the screen there. So you can see, or maybe it's quite small, one of those files is called Working with Children Below Age-Related Expectations. And if you open that or look it up in the teacher guide, then this page of guidance, it's 2 pages actually, fits quite closely as you'd expect with what Tony's been talking about today. But I just wanted to point it out that some of this advice is mentioned in our teacher guides and on Active Learn. So you can see some of the headings there. I think you can see that in terms of pace and fluency and gaps, pre-teaching and same-day intervention as well, all things that are going to be important with children who are working below expectations. But I think we've got another page. If you click through one more slide, I think we have.
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh no, actually, no, we haven't. That's fine. So what I can say then, here is there are 2 pages in that file. One of them is general advice for helping children who are behind, and the other one is what you can do actually in the lesson. So that is just it's snapshots of advice, but hopefully it is just another place that you can look. Fine. So now I could talk about the next slide now, Tony. Thank you very much.
Wow.
I thought I had the second page. So so this is MathsFlex, and we wanted to mention MathsFlex for the just for how well it fits with this topic of children who are working below expectations. So that's not all it is, but it's it's really relevant. So MathsFlex is a digital mastery practice program, and the steps within MathsFlex are the same as the Power Maths progression. So if you're using Power Maths, or of course White Rose Maths new schemes, it fits with that, and also the pictorial representations that are used in MathsFlex also fit with Power Maths and will be familiar to children, and it's adaptive, which of course makes it really useful for children who are working below expectations and indeed higher attainers as well. It's adaptive using machine learning, AI. So the good news, the last point here, the really good news for the people on this call, I think, is there's a really significant discount for Power Maths users. So we wanted to just make you aware of MathsFlex, and do get yourself a trial if you want to find out more about it. And that probably covers that. So I think at this point we can go back to you asking your questions. I can see some questions in there already. Tony, do you think, I don't know if you've seen this question.
Yeah,
Rachel.
So the questions, so there's 2 questions that I think are really important, and I think it's which is they seem to be very similar to, if I think as you go further through the school, right, those gaps potentially get bigger, and so you're ending up with children in year 6 or year 5 who are really working in year 2 and are struggling with numbers to 100, let alone numbers towards 1 million. So totally understand that, and so I want to just pick up on my personal reflections on this, and I'm not going to give this is what you should do, etc., but I will give some thoughts on it. The first thing I would say is that taking that example, so for something like place value as an example, I think a decision needs to be made by the class teacher, by the school, etc., around really what's right for this children in this group who have got these gaps in knowledge. Yeah, so a decision absolutely has to be made. Now, what I don't think should necessarily happen is I don't think there should be three things going on within a lesson. I don't think this group should necessarily be doing these numbers here, etc. I'm not promoting that. However, what I am saying is that some thought needs to be given to those children and what they do, right? So, for example, do they do some extra maths at some time with the teacher at another point? Okay, within the lesson, right? Can the teacher support them so they don't feel that they're missing out on the concept? So the teacher doesn't sort of feel that they're not missing out on the lesson and they're not joining in with their friends and peers in the lesson. But actually, is there a way that we can flex it so that those children still feel comfortable with having a go at what it is? Okay, and that's what I mean about the think together, right? Thinking about the think together, you might want to think together to because of say your group and where they are, you might want to just bring down some of the numbers, or you might want to just say, actually, I'm just going to ask a couple more of these numbers first to make sure that we've all got it and then we're going to move on to this. So I'd really want to stress the importance of that, of adapting it to where those children are, but not having three different lessons taking place in one lesson, right? Because I think the issue is that if you do, and I know some teachers may just say, well, may just go into numbers to 1,000,000, etc., but then if they're not working in numbers to 1,000 yet, or they're not confident with numbers to 1,000, or don't understand the numbers to 1,000, then you're probably just knocking the confidence even more. So it is massively about thinking what I can do to kind of keep those learners and catch up and plug all opportunities. There's not a one size fits all solution. So just to be clear, I think something can be done within lessons as well. And I think every lesson has got a different context to it. The key thing I would say is, and I know you'll do this, and I absolutely know you'll do this. And I'm not saying that you wouldn't as a teacher, but just because they can't do a particular concept, it does not mean that they can't do something else. And I think sometimes the danger is that when in previous times when we've had three tables and three levels, the three levels of ability in a group, or this, it's kind of pigeonholed them, and then children have stayed there. So and that's what evidence suggests, is that you suggest that if you're on the bottom table in maths in year one, you'd be in a bottom set of maths in year 11. And I think it's trying to get over that idea. But yes, absolutely, something needs to be thought about doing with those children who do have those big gaps, whether it's extra stuff. They are going to need extra, in my opinion, but absolutely there are things that they can do within lesson as well, believed to help to give those children that confidence, because it's confidence, in my opinion, that will lead to success. Sorry, I felt I did a long-winded answer there, but I hope that helps really the question. You're on mute, Simon, if you...
Yeah, now we've got a couple of questions of people asking, for instance, they have children with special educational needs and have them working at a lower year group level. We of course have pitched this as more of a kind of children working below expectations, rather than kind of getting into specifics of children who have actually got kind of specific needs. But I just wonder do you feel like you've answered that in what you've said, or would you want to say anything different in relation to special needs? And
I think it's very similar. I think the methods I would encourage are very similar. I think there are different needs at different. I think it's what are those needs in terms, and if there's anything specific need to be aware of, etc. Then sometimes those children sometimes they come with a bit of extra support. So it's about deploying support effectively, etc. But I don't think there's anything specific additional that I would say that I would necessarily recommend, really, apart from, like I said, it's just making sure that I'm adapting it to whatever that particular need is. But it tends to be that they just haven't grasped something as quick as somebody else, or etc. Really.
Yeah. There was a question. I can't remember exactly what the question was, but it made me just reflect on the fact that we obviously have some people who'll be using the original edition, some people are using the new edition, and I wanted to say that I think most of what you've been saying is equally applicable to both editions, although it might be worth saying that when we did the new edition, you were really conscious of trying to make the lessons a bit more accessible, as accessible as possible, and to perhaps make them more accessible to children who were working below expectations. Is that, I just wondered if you want to say anything about that for the new edition.
Yeah, particularly Key Stage 1, I think we did a lot of work at Key Stage 1 to reduce language, to put more fluency based questions in there. We've throughout Power Maths, we've actually cut out more representations as well from the fluency books. So from the practice books. You'll notice that we've now, in quite a few cases, got rid of a particular method or got rid of a representation, because we know sometimes a representation does help for the teaching and the understanding of it, but actually can sometimes be confusing when it comes to the practice side of it as well. So therefore we have taken, we've listened and taken advice, and we've stripped away some of those, some of that content as well, really.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Looking at anything else we might answer. Maybe you could have a little skim and see if there's anything else that you would like to answer. The thing that I would like to say is, having obviously heard what Tony's been saying today, and being aware of all the materials that we have in Power Maths, it would be really valuable to us to have any suggestions that you have for things that you just think would make the difference in terms of catering for diverse attainment and so on. So do give your feedback and any suggestions for what you would like to see. Tony, anything else to answer?
Couldn't see anything specific. So yeah, great. So I think there's a question about if you've got where do you start, where do you pitch the lesson? I think there's something about activating learning at the very start, about making sure that depending on what we're doing in the lesson, what I'm trying to do in that first bit is think about, right, where are some children in my class going to have issues? Okay, what concepts are they going to have issues with, etc., etc. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and before the lesson begins, in that quick recap, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make sure that I'm covering those concepts. But then when I'm into the main lesson, I want to make sure that I'm being ambitious. I want to make sure I'm being ambitious for all learners. It is an absolute challenge. Okay, there's a skill to it. Okay, that develops over. So if you're an ECT on the call and you're thinking this is okay, I promise it's a skill that teachers develop over time, and you will, and you will, it'll get better, and you'll learn and practice, etc., etc. So I think there is a skill, but I'd always encourage making sure that you are teaching toward more the top end of concept, but you're adapting to support those children earlier on. Those children who maybe do have those gaps, whose prior attainment is not as high as some, really.
Great, thank you. The question about STEM sentences, and I'd be interested to know a bit more about that one. So it says, could we have some correlating STEM sentences within the presentations, please? I suppose we're conscious of not wanting to put too much on the page, on the other hand. And I guess the way that we kind of help structure answers throughout the textbooks and practice books is kind of, we're trying to kind of help children build their answers. So yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about it, Tony, but otherwise I'd be interested to sort of know what would it look like, what would you want us to do differently?
Yeah, I think there are the occasion where we do use stem sentences. Okay, I think there are occasions where we do. I think we, particularly in years 1 and year 2, I think we use them a bit more regularly when we're talking about groups. I think there was an example on the page that we shared in the practice. So I think we do try and use them. I don't think we have a major focus on them in Power Maths. It is designed to run alongside the White Rose curriculum. So within the White Rose curriculum, for every single step, there are some examples of stem sentences that sometimes we picked up and used within Power Maths, but that's always a document that you can refer to, that you can potentially use within the lesson as well. But I think it's something, I think we were conscious of a lot of the feedback we were getting about the first edition was very much, it was a bit too wordy and a bit too confusing in places, etc., etc. So we chose to reduce that a bit, really. So hopefully, so it's just that balance, really. I'm not saying I'm not an advocate of stem sentences. I think they can be used really well, but I think it was a decision that we chose to not do as many, really.
Thanks, Tony. We've got past 1:45, so yeah. I think the other thing about obviously today is because we switched a bit with the audio. I really hope that you could understand Tony well enough at the beginning. I could, although then it got a lot better. So I'm hoping that's the same. Obviously, you'll be able to see the recording if you feel like there's something that you want to check. I can imagine some people might like to see slides, so we might see whether we can email those.
Might have been my Yorkshire accent, Simon, coming through. Apologies.
Yeah, maybe I'm used to it. Cool. Okay. So I don't want to ask you just to do the start again. I don't think we'll do that, but hopefully everybody will be able to fill in the gaps. Thanks for all the questions, and we will just try. I think that the only other thing I wanted to say is that we're not really in the business of trying to fix you, saying you are not allowed to use Power Maths in this way or that way. And we know that there are obviously teacher judgment is really important, and you'll make really good decisions about some of these tough choices that you face with particular children and so on. Hopefully all the ideas have been helpful, and we'll welcome any suggestions that you have on like what would be the next thing that would be useful for you. But I think we could probably leave it there. And so just want to say thanks very much, Tony, for taking the time to go through all of this. And I hope everybody's found it really useful. Yeah. No, thank you. And lovely meeting everybody again today. Thank you. Yeah. Great. So I think we can end the session there and just look out for more webinars in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Tony.
Thanks.